Hi, in this chapter what I wanted to do is talk about aperture. There are two things about aperture. One is how much light the camera is able to have come in because of the iris being either open or constrained, as well as the effect of depth of field. So the first one we'll talk about in a moment, but one of the things I wanted to mention to you as you look at your camera and potentially buy some additional lenses is to keep an eye out for something like this, which is that there's going to be a number on the actual lens itself that will tell you the maximum aperture on it. In this case, it's a 1.4 lens. And so when you look at the lenses that you may have or going out to buy, there is a consideration that you have about the maximum aperture. Think about the game of golf. The lower the score, the better the number. So the lower the F number, the larger amount of light is able to come into the camera. The higher the number, the less light comes in. When you look at buying lenses, especially the zooms, they may have what's called a variable maximum aperture. This particular lens has a fixed maximum aperture of f1.4, which is very, very bright and lets you to do a lot of different things, especially for portraiture. This is an 85mm lens. Whereas if you look at some of the variable zooms, whether they're wide angles or telephotos, you could see things that go from f4 to 5.6, f4 to 6.3, which will have an impact on two things. One is how much light is able to come into the camera. That will change some of the considerations that you might have as far as what ISO you're going to have to set, as well as inevitably what is the depth of field that you have at the end of the day. Whereas if you happen to have something that has a fixed maximum aperture, you know that if you set it at a particular number, especially on the zoom lenses, you're going to have more creative control over your depth of field. So one thing that I wanted to do is show you an example of an actual variable iris as we go through that, as well as some studio and outdoor examples of what the impact of depth of field is going to have on your photography. Anyway, let's go have a look at some of the examples. In this clip, what I'm going to try to show you using a classic film camera is what an aperture actually looks like on a lens. And a current era digital camera, whether it's mirrorless or DSLR, will do exactly the same thing. However, what will happen is that the aperture will be opened up all the way in order to allow the focus system to get as much light come into the camera sensor as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start stopping it down. We're at f1.8, which is its maximum aperture, the most amount of light, f2.8, f4, f5.6, f8, f11, and its maximum means of providing depth of field, or its minimum aperture, is f16. So this is the minimum, that's the least amount of light, but it's going to give you the most intense depth of field. And this is the maximum aperture, which will provide you the least amount of depth of field. Okay, so we've set everything up for the studio and the basement, and I want to show you what the lights are showing here. As far as the incident meter is concerned, we've got something in around f8 at 1/30th of a second at 1/1000th of ISO. And so what I'm trying to do with the camera, I'm going to let it do things in multi-segment metering, and I'm going to set everything on aperture priority mode since it's fairly close to what the meter is showing me. And what we're going to do is look through depth of field from a shallow depth of field through to something stronger like f8. And the camera that's to the right is a Nikon D850 with a 50mm f1.4 G lens, which is a well-respected lens as far as sharpness is concerned. So let's have a go at that, and I'll show you the stills as a result. So we now have a new set of targets on the table, and I have two 4-pound kettle bells that are on either side of the main focus target, and we're starting them off at the dead center of the table. And then what I'm going to do is I have a ruler that I'm going to measure them to be 6 inches in front of the target and 6 inches behind, and then you're going to see the results as far as the depth of field is concerned, as far as shallow to something more moderate and then stronger.